All right, so thank you guys so much for joining Sharks for Kids for another awesome webinar. My name is Jillian. I'm the founder of Sharks for Kids, and obviously we love sharks, but turtles are pretty awesome animals. So really excited to be hosting this session today to help you guys learn a little bit more about another amazing sea creature. And with us today we have Annabelle Brooks, and I'm really excited. Annabelle has a ton of experience, over 18 years of working in marine ecology. She's based on the island of Eleuthera in the Bahamas and has been worked with the Cape Eleuthera Institute. And she's also now currently leading several projects in the Bahamas to better understand these incredible creatures within that region. So I'm going to go ahead. Again, thank you guys for joining us. Make sure you're typing your questions in the Q&A, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Annabelle.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. And thanks everyone for being here. Hope everyone is staying well. So here, let me share my screen with you. I have a slideshow for you guys. All right, hopefully everybody can see that now. And the focus of what I'm going to talk about today, everyone, is going to be really just focusing on what we're doing in terms of studying turtles and how we go about that. And like Julian said, I'm here in the Bahamas, and maybe you have an idea where I am, hopefully. So Bahamas is located about southeast off of Florida. And I specifically am in this little island here. It's called Eleuthera. And I put this quote up there, which I thought was pretty cool. So this is an astronaut who was up in the space station, and he said that the Bahamas was one of the most beautiful places he could see from space. And I would have to agree. You can see there's lots of beautiful shallow waters, lots of different blues. And the Bahamas really is an island nation. So lots of islands spread out with lots of deep water bodies. And in the shallow areas, there's coral reefs and mangroves and sandbars and just lots of different habitats. And this makes it a really awesome place to find sea turtles. And here are a couple of green sea turtles. Hopefully you can see the video working. And this is really lucky. This is not normally how a turtle would behave. It probably would shoot off away from you, pretty scared of you. This is a location where there's been some tourism activities that involve turtle feeding, and so the turtles aren't so scared. But what it means is that you get a chance to see these animals really up close. So these are two young juvenile green sea turtles, and those are going to be the focus of what I'm going to speak about today, because they're one of the more common turtles that you can find here in the Bahamas, and I think one of the more beautiful ones for sure. But before I get stuck into how we study them, I'm going to just focus a little bit more on turtles in general. And I'm going to ask you some questions during this PowerPoint. I know I can't hear you, but maybe you can just shout out where you are, some of the answers if you know. Okay, so in a second, we're going to talk about the different species of sea turtles. So have a think. Do you know how many different kinds of sea turtles there are on the planet? All right, well, here we go. So there's actually 7. So I don't know if you guessed that right or not, but there are 7 different species. So we'll go through them. The one you can see here in the background, the huge one, is actually prehistoric. So it's not around anymore. It was around about 66 million years ago. So that gives you an idea that turtles are actually kind of like living dinosaurs. So other species that we don't see now, but they were around millions and millions of years ago. And that one was over 7 foot tall. But the rest of the ones that you see here are present in different oceans here on our planet. And you can see on the left there, there's a human. So it gives you kind of a scale of size of these turtles. And the biggest one is the leatherback sea turtle, can get up to 1,000 pounds, over 1,000 pounds. And then we get the loggerhead and the greens are the next biggest. And the rest of these turtles are a little bit different. They're actually called, like, they're hard-shelled turtles. The leatherback has kind of a very different soft skin kind of shell. But the rest of these are hard turtles. And we've got the loggerhead, the green, the flatback sea turtle, which you would only see if you went to Australia. And then we get the hawksbill, is even smaller. And the name hawksbill is actually referring to its beak, or its like mouth shape. So it's kind of like a hawk, so it's pointed. And that's so it can go digging around for food on a coral reef, picking out sponges and so on. And then we get the Kemp's ridley, and the smallest one being the olive ridley there. So 7 different species. They all look very different, different sizes. They eat different things and live in different habitats, from coral reefs to seagrass beds to the open ocean. All right, so we're going to move on now and talk just to highlight very briefly, because I'm not going to get into this a lot, but why do we even study sea turtles in the first place? And it's really important to know that those 7 species are all in different states of trouble in their population. So they've all been impacted by humans in different ways. And so later on today, maybe, or some other point, you guys should have a look at this website. So it's called the IUCN Red List. So there's the address there, iucnredlist.org. And you can type in the name of any animal or plant on this planet, and it'll give you an assessment of what did scientists know about that animal as far as how their population is doing, what are different threats it might be facing. And it lets you know. And so the scale at the bottom then is the scale of the different assessments that might be made. So from least concern, so we're not really worried about a species, it's doing fine, to near threatened, that's NT, and then we get the threatened classes. So whether it's vulnerable, endangered, or critically endangered. You might have heard those words or terms being used before. And then unfortunately, if threats are so bad and numbers are reduced so much, it may well become extinct. Okay, so it's really important to know these really beautiful animals. A lot of people love sea turtles. Maybe you haven't had a chance to snorkel with them. They're really incredible animals, been around a long time, but they're all suffering different threats right now that have reduced their populations to the point where they're all endangered at some level. Okay, and that's why it's really important for us to learn as much as we can about them and therefore work towards their conservation. All right, so I'm going to go through this life cycle. There's a lot going on here, so I'm going to just go step by step, okay? So this is primarily like with the green turtle, for instance, the one that we study here in the Bahamas the most, see the most. But let's start off up here. So you must probably already know that sea turtles start their lives in eggs, okay? They're reptiles, and so the mother turtle lays her nest on a beach. So she actually physically comes out the ocean, crawls up the beach, digs a hole, a really deep hole with her rear flippers, a couple of feet deep in some cases, and she'll drop her eggs that look like big ping pong balls into the nest, and she might lay anywhere between like 50 to like 120 eggs, again, depending on the species. So it takes a lot of effort, a lot of energy, and she leaves them, she covers up the nest again, tries to hide it, pretend it's not there, and heads back to the ocean, and that is it. She will never see her babies. So after nearly about 2 months or so, these eggs have incubated and the hatchlings have formed, and they will start to emerge. So they'll actually come out of their eggs, come up to the surface on the beach, and head to the ocean. So this is their first real emergence and experience on land, and they head straight to the ocean. They want to get out as far as they can in the open ocean and survive, because you can imagine there's all kinds of predators there. So maybe birds and fish and so on are waiting for them. And so the ones that survive will head out into the open ocean, and here's where they'll spend quite a lot of time trying to get much bigger so they can be a lot stronger and survive, more likely to survive. Okay, so they'll be feeding out in the open ocean. They might be drifting around in sargassum beds, which is like an algae that floats out in the ocean. And they're eating little things like little crabs and little vertebrates and little jellyfish and things like that out there. And then once they get to a slightly bigger size, okay, so maybe around like 20 centimeters, think of like a small, like a bread plate or a small dinner plate, they will start heading back into coastal waters, okay? So out in the open ocean, they were just avoiding anybody out there trying to get big and strong, and now they're ready to come back to the coastal zone. And so for instance, here in the Bahamas, that would mean it's coming into nice shallow banks areas. There's mangroves, seagrass beds, beautiful tidal creeks, nice and shallow, so that they can keep growing in the next phase of their life. And the reason they like shallow water is because, again, they want to avoid predators. And so when it's really nice and shallow, nothing too big can get in there after them. And they'll spend maybe even up to 30, 40 years of their lives in these areas. Okay, so that gives you an idea. It takes a really long time for them to grow, really similar to sharks, actually. And so it takes a really long time for them to grow, so they're really vulnerable. Because if they get hurt or killed or something happens to them before they've had a chance to reproduce, that's one way that their numbers can start to decline. So hopefully they'll make it to adulthood, and that's when they'll take on a really big migration, okay? And they'll head off to reproductive areas, and they'll do these big reproductive migrations, or they'll look for a mate. And this might be anywhere from tens to hundreds, even thousands of miles in the open ocean, swimming, looking for the right place. And then once they've mated, the females are the only ones that head back up onto the nesting beach. The male turtles never leave the sea. The females have to come up just for this nesting period, which lasts a couple of months. And she might lay a nest, go back to sea for a couple of weeks, and then head back onto the beach and lay a couple of nests a season. And then she might take a year or two off and get her energy back. Okay, so that's the general life cycle of turtles, specifically mainly the green turtle. All right, now when we see them here in the Bahamas, they've come back into these coastal areas. This is really what they look like, really beautiful mangrove creeks, and really all that's changed in there is the tides are bringing either high water or low water over the course of the day, and they spend most of their time eating, feeding, and just trying to avoid being eaten. All right, reason why Bahamas is a really important place to study turtles is that if you look at this picture, so that dot, can you see my cursor? Yeah, right here. So this is in the southern Bahamas, a place called Great Inagua, where turtles have been studied for decades. Using genetics, so taking a sample, like a tissue or blood sample from a turtle, we can look at its family and where it was born originally. And you can see these arrows basically are indicating where all the turtles that were caught there, these juveniles that were caught there, where they were originally born. And the size of the turtle tells you the proportion. So by far more turtles are coming from the Southeast US, from Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean, and some even as far as South America, out in the Atlantic, and even west coast of Africa. So turtles that were born in all those different areas at some point are going to spend time here in the Bahamas. So it's a really great place to study them, and also a really important area for them developmentally, because eventually when they become adults, they're going to head back to those countries. So what happens to them here, as far as their conservation, is going to impact those populations as well. All right, so now I want to talk a little bit about just the biology very quickly, or the shape of a turtle. So you maybe already know some of these words already, but for instance, again, shout out if you know the name of this. So you might well be saying shell. There's another term we use for it, and that's the carapace. Okay, so the hard back of the shell is known as the carapace. The belly side also has a name. It's also hard. It's called the plastron. What about these? These are the flippers. Okay, pretty easy to remember. So these are the front flippers, which really they use mainly for their power for swimming. And then the ones at the back at the end here, the rear flippers, are more kind of like for steering, and they don't move as much when they're swimming around. All right. Anybody know what these are? So the shell, carapace, is actually divided up by lots of little plates, and different species of turtle have different numbers and patterns of these plates, which actually helps you tell what species it is. So you might well know it, but these guys are called, oh, wait a second, I can't see because of my screen share thing at the top. There we go. All right, those are the scutes. And so you get them lateral scutes on the sides, and you get the central scutes. They also have patterns on their skin, so like on the flippers and on their head and so on, and you get lots of different, what we call scales. Okay, so scutes and scales. And I'll talk about again a bit more about this in a little while. All right, so now let's talk about how we catch them, okay? Because to study a turtle, you need to catch it first. And there's a bunch of different techniques. Some cases you might use nets. I'm going to focus mainly on the one that I use the most and really my favorite. It's called the rodeo technique. It's kind of modified from the rodeo technique. So maybe that gives you an idea about what we have to do. But in any area where we can get to where it's nice and shallow, but you can get a boat in, and when there's a high number of turtles, because there's lots of great habitat and shelter for them, like mangroves, for instance, we will drive around in our little boat until we spot a turtle. And so that might be like this little guy, he's coming up to breathe, or we might well see like a big brown dark shape on the bottom where it's feeding or resting. Sometimes we see rocks, sometimes we see sponges, and we're like, nope, that wasn't it, because it didn't swim away, so we know it wasn't a turtle. But often or not, more often than not, we'll see something like this, and we'll be like, great, turtle. And so that's when we start following it. Okay, so the chase, what happens is that turtle generally doesn't want to be caught, right? So it's swimming off away from us, and we'll have people on the boat ready. So we'll follow it with the boat. And the turtle can't swim forever, right? Really fast. Just like us, we can sprint for a little while and then we get tired. You come up to breathe a few times. And then as it slows down, we'll put a snorkeler in the water next. So they'll hop in and then they'll start swimming after the turtle. And you'll get right above it until eventually you just scoop it right up and you've caught it. And they're really strong. Remember, those front flippers are for swimming, and they can swim extremely fast. The green turtle is one of the fastest turtles there is. And so what we'll do is kind of pick it up right underneath its front flippers, kind of like under its armpits, like you're going to tickle it, and you can pick it up like that. and get it back in the boat. I actually have a little video for you of what this looks like. And this is one of our volunteers who's one of the best turtle catchers I know. And you can see that. So we're following along. We know the turtle's right in front. We'll stop the boat, put it in neutral, and then she hops in. She doesn't even have to swim after it. She just duck dives down, and up she comes with a little green turtle. And that was perfect. Great. And so we get that in the boat. And now we're going to talk a bit about the data that we collect. So we have our data sheet, and there's a whole list of things that we want to get information on from this turtle. And depending on the project, you'll have more or less things that you want to learn about. But in general, every turtle that we catch, we want to take a whole lot of measurements. We want to tag it and then release it as quickly as possible. Now, because turtles are air breathers, it's completely fine for them to be out of the water, but we want to keep them nice and cool, and we want it to just kind of be done as quick as possible so we can get them back in the sea and let them go on their way. All right, so there's a few different ways we take measurements. So we might well use a tape measure here. So you can see we're using a soft, regular kind of tape measure to measure the shell, or we might have to use what we call calipers. So it's basically a really big ruler that you can use on the shell of the turtle. And that's the main part of the turtle. So it's not like with us, right, where we measure our height from our top of our head to our feet. We actually just focus on the shell of the turtle. It's a lot easier to do that and to track them as they grow as well. All right, we might even measure their heads. So these are some mini calipers there. The measurements that we take 2 of them here. So you can see the length. So right from the top of the shell to the tip, that's what we call the carapace length. And then we'll also look at the widest part of the turtle and look at the width there. Okay, so we might use a tape measure, we might use calipers to do that. Then also we'll take a lot of photos of every turtle. So, you might think, oh, a turtle's a turtle. When you start looking at them, they're incredibly different. Each individual is very different from another, just like we all look different as well. Okay, so if you look at their face, if you remember these patterns, they're called scales. Turtles have very unique patterns of scales in their face. Think of it as like our thumbprint or fingerprint. Okay, same thing on their flippers. You can see all the scales really beautifully here now on that front flip of this turtle. And then looking at the carapace, even just the color changes. So especially again, the green turtle has got lots of different color variations. Some really light, almost lemony green, some really dark brown, some have swirls on them. So lots of different things. And sometimes they have abnormalities as well. So maybe there's an extra scoot, or maybe it's got a big bite that's been taken out of it as well. So we'll note all of that down and take photos for analysis afterwards. We also on the lookout for disease. So unfortunately, particularly the green turtle again, there's a disease called the fibropapilloma virus that is affecting it, and it results in these kind of growths. So you can see this is quite up close on the skin of the turtle, this growth. It's kind of like a little tumor is growing on it. And so we'll take its measurement, we'll write down where exactly it is. And then if we recapture that turtle at a later point, we can see how much that disease has changed, if it's got better or got worse. We're also interested in knowing in how many turtles that we catch have this disease, so we can see how much of a threat it is. And we still really don't know a lot about it, as far as just, how does it even transmit from like one turtle to another? What causes it? What makes a turtle get sick? And so on. So we're still trying to learn a lot about that. And then finally, when we're done with all our data collection, and now I haven't mentioned, again, depending on the study, there's other things you might do, but there are also studies that require you to take a tissue sample from a turtle. So you might take a little piece of skin, or you might even take a little bit of blood. We mentioned earlier about genetics. So for instance, trying to learn more about where a turtle's from, or you can learn a lot about even their diet by taking a little sample. All right, but it really depends on what you're studying. But one of the most important things we do is that we want to mark that turtle. So we put what we call a tag. So this is a flipper tag. You see it's a little metal strip that gets put in. Sometimes you see ones that look more like cattle tags that go like in the ear of a cow. You can put those in sharks, put them in turtles as well, in the flippers. But the main thing is that you're identifying that very individual turtle. So this unique code, so you can see there's 2 letters there, HJ 6148. Only that turtle is going to have that number. So at any point, whether we catch it again, or maybe another person, another scientist, hopefully one day this juvenile turtle is going to end up going back to his beach. If somebody is there patrolling the beach and catches this turtle, sees this turtle and write down the number, we can go back into a big global database that tells us, hey, Annabelle caught that turtle in the Bahamas back in 2012. And you can learn so much as far as movements, how much they've grown, and just how are they doing survivorship and so on. So it's really important that we do that. And that red bit of flagging tape you can see there, it's a biodegradable bit of tape. And we do that so that we don't recapture that guy later the day or the next day and so on. We want to leave him alone. Okay, and that will kind of dissolve off in a matter of about a week or so. All right, and that's the last thing we do. And just to highlight, I wanted to highlight a few things why this is super important. Oh, this is when we let them go, of course, as soon as possible. Very excited to get back in the water. Normally they just shoot right off and go back to eating. So I mentioned a bit about some of the data we collect. So these are 4 turtles, right? And we can see that this guy, this is just the length on the side. You can see we measure them in centimeters. Along the bottom is just time. So you can see this first turtle we actually have been monitoring the longest. It's actually over about 6 years or so. And every time we capture it, we take the measurements, and so we can see from one point to another how much has it grown. So this guy overall has grown over 27 centimeters, but over that whole time period, it means it's been growing about 4 centimeters a year, which is actually kind of the average growth rate for turtles here. And so if we look at some of the other ones, this one's growing more like 3.2 centimeters a year. This guy also 4, this one 4.55. Now, all these turtles were caught in the same location. So we can say, okay, well, in this one creek here, these turtles are growing so much. Is there much variation? Are some turtles in better shape than others? But we can also compare, for instance, our island here on Eleuthera to another island in the Bahamas or elsewhere, and see why the turtles, why they're growing better in some locations than other. Is it because the habitat's really good? Is there more food here and so on? Does disease impact that? And we can also do things like what we do with humans. You know, maybe you've heard of body mass index, for instance. So we look at the length as well as the weight of the turtle, and it tells us about what kind of physical condition the turtle's in. So is it really big and also really chunky? So it's been eating loads of awesome seagrass. Great, it's in really good shape. Whereas if you get one that's the same length, but maybe weighs a lot less, it tells you that it's in not as good shape. It's really skinny. It's not doing as well. And so we can start to learn what makes a really great habitat and maybe what kind of conditions are causing turtles not to be at their healthiest. And that's really important for us to know. All right, one cool thing that really happened just recently, actually. So that turtle, so remember we just talked about these tags, that unique ID, so it says HJ7092. Well, it just so happened that turtle was in my database. This turtle was tagged in Abaco, which is in the northern Bahamas, and he was found in Haiti. So he was seen at, there was a market, so people eat turtles in Haiti, and it was in a market, and somebody that we know saw the tag, and just so by chance, very lucky really, it was in our database. So it's really incredible. It tells you a lot about migration. So this is where he was tagged up here, and this turtle swam over 500 miles to make it all the way down here. So really learning a lot about just the movements of these animals based on these tags. Really neat. All right, and same thing here, you know, after Hurricane Dorian, I'm sure you maybe have heard of it, it was a huge hurricane, unfortunately affected the Bahamas last year. And after that hurricane, this turtle was found on the road. So it'd been thrown out of the water onto a road. People were able to find it, and they actually got through Facebook, of all things, they were able to get in touch with us, and we were able to look in our database. It was actually a turtle we had just tagged a few months before. They hadn't moved very far at all, and they put it back in the water. So it was really neat. Okay, some other techniques. You might have heard of drones, I'm sure by now. So drones are really useful for looking at turtles, and I've got a little video here. So one thing we can do is look for turtles by boat, but it's really hard to see in the water. Can you see a turtle here? See that turtle there? How many can you see? Another one here, another one here. You can see there's a different species here as well. We've got a shark. So drones are really helpful for covering big areas and getting right above, and you can fly a drone over an area, and then later on when you're sat at your computer, you can look at the video footage and get a real up-close view of what's going on down there, count how many turtles, any other kind of behaviors as well. So drone, which is relatively new technology, has really helped us do a much better job of surveying for turtles. Whereas in the past, we used to just drive around the boat and rely on our eyes to look for them. And you know, if it's cloudy, if the weather's a bit rough, like it's really hard to see and you might miss turtles. So drones have been really, really helpful in being able to do much better censuses or assessments of populations. All right, another aspect of turtles that we might be studying are their diet. So what are they eating? You can see here turtle grass. So you can see pretty distinctly, right? There's this really nice long lush grass on the right. On the left is where it's being cropped. And seagrass is one of the main things that green sea turtles love to eat. So you can see they're doing a real good job of acting like a lawnmower and keeping that in really good shape. And so some studies that are really interested in more about, what are turtles eating in this area and how is it affecting them? You can collect seagrass and do studies with it in the lab. You can also map the seagrass. So here, the bigger the dot, the more red it is where there's more seagrass. So you can map an area and say, this habitat would be really great for turtles. Not so much food going on here. Maybe that's why we don't see any turtles. Another study I worked on here. So this was the work of a master's student called Megan Gary. So she did her work here on Eleuthera. So look at this. This is an aerial view, a satellite view of a mangrove creek. Okay, and through her study, she was interested in looking at why do you see some turtles in some parts of the creek and not others, and so on, and how do they use their space, which is also known as their home range, so the area in which the turtle spends its time day to day. And so she put really special tags on turtles that ping, and so with this real cool equipment called a hydrophone, she could listen underwater and track individual turtles and kind of make a map of where they were spending their time. And so this is just some of her results, but you can see up here on the top left, just focus really where the red is for now. But the red here shows this turtle pretty much spent all his time over here. Over here, we've got different turtles. So that turtle on the right, top right, spent most of its time pretty much over there. And the third turtle kind of over here. So we learned that even within one creek, one habitat, turtles don't necessarily all just kind of hang out all over the place. They have their set home ranges where they hang out, where they're doing their thing, they're getting the food they need, the habitat and shelter that they need, and they don't necessarily often even interact. And we also are really interested in knowing how big is that home range, because the more a turtle needs to swim to find food, then the more energy it's going to expend. So it obviously wants to save its energy, to balance the energy it uses to find what it needs. All right, another cool tag that you can put on turtle, and this work was done by another master's student called Jess Rudd. So she put this accelerometer on a turtle. And so basically think of it as a phone. I think most people have seen like a smartphone, right? And you know that when you turn your phone, everything on the screen turns, right? So think about putting one of those on the back of a turtle. It's called an accelerometer. And what it does is it knows when you turn it this way, backwards, forwards, and it can measure all these various axes, basically. So forwards, backwards, up and down, rolling side to side, and it records that. So if we put that on a turtle, you basically can use that information to learn about its activities or the amount of energy that it's spending. And it gives you lots of this kind of information too. So this is a kind of complicated graph it spits out, but basically you can learn a lot about depth. All right, so this is the surface up at the top where it says 0, and you can see how deep a turtle might dive, then it comes back up for air, goes back down again, maybe it's feeding and so on. You learn a lot about just the environment it's in. So this is just the temperature of the water. So you can see there's a spike in temperature when it's near the surface, and it gets colder the deeper it dives. And then down here, this fast one is really just getting at energy. So the amount of movement that accelerometer feels, it equates to acceleration or energy. We use it as a way to just infer energy use in a turtle. So how fast is it swimming sometimes versus slow other times? Is it resting, sleeping, avoiding a predator, and so on? So that was a really cool study. I'm just going to skip through here because I realize I've been talking for a while. But one of the coolest things she did, I thought, was show this. So this is a turtle, okay? See that whizzing dot? So this turtle, actually, let me pause it for a second. He actually lives over here. All right, so this is the creek the turtle was in. And we wanted to learn about homing behavior in turtles. Can they find their way home? Or how do they do it? Okay, we know that turtles find their way back to their original beach where they were born. But how about juveniles? You know, if a juvenile was in an area, for instance, where there's an oil spill, we want to save those turtles and move them away. But what if they just go right back home again where they, where they knew they came from? That could potentially put them in trouble. So we were trying to learn more about that kind of behavior. So the turtle that lived over here was taken around this headland. It wasn't really too far, it's only about 4 kilometers away, and put over here. And it had an accelerometer on it, a GPS tag, so you could see its location. And that dot that's moving, you can see sometimes it was going slow, sometimes it was whizzing around fast, and eventually hit the headland. And you can see what it does in a second. It's trying to figure out, and then all of a sudden it just knew where it was, and it went all the way around. It kind of looks like it's some land. It's not, it's just the location data. But it eventually found its way back to its creek, which is really amazing. It was one of the first times that's been shown. So real fancy technology and tags that can be used. I'm going to skip through this quickly. So you might have hopefully watched Dr. Duncan Ershik's talk, I think last week, talking about digital life and making 3D models out of sea turtles. If not, go back and watch it, really cool. We've been really fortunate to work with Duncan to make models of turtles. So you can see here, there are all these cameras set up and we take multiple photos of a turtle. So this is one on the beach here. And what you can do, I'm going to just switch screen really quickly. I think I can do this. Hopefully this is working. Yeah, and you can see, and basically what it does is make this lifelike model. You can see it moving around of a turtle. And the reason we wanted to do this is because we had the idea that we wanted to do all 7 species of sea turtle in the world and be able to make digital representation of them. And so that's been a really awesome project. And I'm not going to focus too much because I have been talking for a while already, but it took us to Costa Rica. We were able to study the olive ridley over there as well. And next, trying to work on getting some swimming behavior of turtles in the water as well. And you can also 3D print these models and make your own turtles from them as well. And they're all exactly, they're very biologically accurate, which is really neat. Okay, so I'm not going to talk too much about that. The predators. Okay, so turtles also have predators. Maybe you already know what they might be. You ever think what predators of turtles might be? Maybe you think sharks. You would be right. And not only are they out there eating turtles, they're also out there scaring turtles. So I just use this picture to show turtles can be pretty terrifying looking. Doesn't mean they are. But turtles might well feel under the threat of a predator in an area. So their main one is called the tiger shark. Okay. And this is actually something, I think this was actually in Bimini a few years ago. This is a very big tiger shark, and it was predating or eating a turtle. It was definitely an older turtle. You can see it's got barnacles all over it. I'm sure it wasn't in very good shape. So the shark has to be pretty big to be able to hurt a turtle, but those are the main predators. Some awesome photos here of a predation. And the way we study this is through what we call BRUVs. So I'm going to just show you again another quick video. So BRUVs are baited remote underwater video surveys. And so this is a really awesome, beautiful little tiger shark here. So what you do is you put some bait in the water. So that just might be some fish. So this was collected by Dr. Beth Whitman. And you record with a camera, like a GoPro. And instead of having to catch the shark in the area, what you do is just watch your footage afterwards, and you will see if sharks are in the area, how many, what species, and it gives you an idea of the amount of predators in the area, and therefore might they be influencing the distribution of the sea turtles in the area as well. So it's a really neat way to learn more about what are the factors that are affecting the populations of sea turtles in an area. And you don't have to go out there and try and catch sharks or anything, which can be invasive and it takes a lot of work. Instead, you can just put a camera in the water and some bait, and obviously done very scientifically, and you would learn a lot about predation risk and threat to turtles, which is really the main thing that would hurt them. All right, this is the last one that I wanted to talk about, some of the more technology. This is a project run by Dr. Nathan Robinson that we've been a part of, and we've deployed a lot of what we call turtle cams. So again, it also goes on the shell of a turtle. You can see this, the float there, the red thing, but you can put a camera on the back of a turtle. A lot of people have done this, and it stays on for about anywhere from like 3 to 5 hours before it pops off. And then you use this fancy VHF or radio tracker to find it again. People think you look pretty strange unless they know what you're doing, but you will drive around the boat until eventually you pick up the camera. And the neat thing is you then get to watch, where's the turtle been spending its time? What is it seeing under there? And it's a really unique way that you can learn everything, like what's from the eye of a turtle, essentially. How does it spend its time? What's its behavior like, and so on. So you can actually find these are also available on YouTube, but I just want to show you from snippets. So this is a compilation of a bunch of different turtles. He just came up for a breath. And this guy, he actually came across another turtle who's trying to have his breakfast there. You can see he's munching down on seagrass. That was pretty cool. He obviously didn't like being interrupted. And then they go into different habitats as well. This is a Caribbean whiptail ray, so different species of animals that they're coming across as well, which is pretty neat. So remember, this camera comes off the turtle after just a couple of hours. This turtle ventured out to coral reefs, so away from a mangrove creek. There's snappers and goatfish there. You can learn a lot about different habitats from their underwater view as well. So really, really neat new project. I know I went a bit over time there, but that was my last slide. And the last thing I just wanted to say was, if any of you guys are interested in maybe wanting to do this kind of stuff at some point, Earthwatch is an awesome organization. So I get a lot of volunteers that come and help me every year, from teenagers all the way through to adults. So they have team programs too. And you can come out and spend a week in the field with a scientist and help them do their work. Or even the Cape Eleuthera Institute, if you're a bit older and you're looking for an internship, they have lots of cool internships where you get to go out in the field and learn from scientists and actually conduct the research as well. And you can also follow us on the Bahamas Sea Turtle Network and Instagram. And that is it. I'm sorry, I went a little bit long there.
No, it's great. Thank you so much. And you answered a lot. We had a lot of great questions, and you answered a lot of them. And I think it's really cool. Having done the turtle wrangling myself, for you guys watching, it's when somebody's really good at it, they make it look very, very easy. It is difficult. It is not. It is definitely not easy. But it is. It's a one of the best ways to handle the animal and with minimal equipment and so yeah, pretty exciting. And that tiger shark was in Bimini. We were sad that we missed that one. That was definitely one we were like, oh man, very cool. But we do, we see turtles with injuries there, so we know what happens, and we have lots of tiger sharks. So great. Well, you guys, lots of questions. The first one we're going to ask came from Rachel, Olivia, Nolan, and Sophia. Wanted to know your favorite species of sea turtle, if you have one.
Oh gosh. I'm gonna have to go the green sea turtle. I mean, it's, I think, the prettiest, the most beautiful, the one that I've been able to spend most time with. It's the first turtle I ever caught, and yeah, there's just so much to learn about them, and it kept me busy for the last 9 years or so. So yeah, I'd have to say that.
And even though we're talking about turtles, I know you've done shark research, and we've had quite a few people ask, Michaela included, if you have a favorite shark species.
Oh gosh. I don't know. Well, sharks, and that's been really awesome. I gotta say, bull sharks I think were my favorite, and then I came to Bimini and dove with the great hammerheads, and that was like the best day of my life. So I think I might have to say the hammerhead, great hammerhead.
Yeah, they're definitely
very beautiful, very graceful, very, I don't know, at the time it was very calming to be in the water with them. It was beautiful.
Yeah. I'm wondering now what they're all doing, hanging out by themselves. I'm wondering what happened to everybody. Very cool. All right. Breslin wants to know if you've ever, you talked about, kind of showed the one from Abaco that was rescued, but have you ever rescued a turtle or found a turtle that need rescuing?
Yeah, it doesn't happen too often, which is really good news. I know that last summer we were working in Abaco for a few weeks, and we actually found a couple of turtles that had fishing line like tangled up in their flippers. So it was really great. We were able to catch it and spend some time getting that off, and we gave it a bit of iodine and cleaned it up and sent it on its way. That has been the main, I think that's one of the main ones that I've had to deal with here. It's just something like entanglement and so on. So yeah, very fortunate. I think the reality is that when you're out in areas where there's a lot more fishing that goes on, or where there's a lot more debris, or even so I don't work with nesting turtles. We don't have a lot of nesting here in the Bahamas, but I'm aware of people that have seen a lot more nesting turtles in trouble, because they're coming up onto beaches where there might be lots of marine debris and so on. Yeah.
I'm just answering a few others.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. Allison and Caitlin and Alexander would like to know, how long do sea turtles live? Or maybe just even the green turtle that you work with.
Yeah, so one of the tough things is that you can't really know. So unless you were to kill a turtle, for instance, and look at its bones, you wouldn't know. So that's one of the challenges there. So what you really have to rely on is how long you can recapture a turtle. So for instance, if you work on a nesting beach, turtle first came and nested there, so you can guess what age it was at maturity, roughly, let's say like 20 years. And then you know how many years it's been coming to nest for. So you could say, oh, this turtle must be around 60, 70 years of age. But in general, I would say they're mature around like they're 80, 90, potentially even 100 years old. Definitely not over like 120, like Finding Nemo told everybody, unfortunately. But yeah, they can get really old.
Right. I thought this was a good question. Joy asked, do they, because you kind of see all the hatchlings are sort of together in a big group, but do turtles as adults, or even as they get a bit older, do they travel together, or are they solo?
Yeah, so they don't necessarily travel together or specifically hang out together in groups, you know, so like that turtle with the camera, you could see it was obviously seeing other turtles in the area. So there's just like a high density of turtles in one area because that's where they live. Necessarily purposely attracted to spending time together. Certainly when they migrate, it's pretty much a solo venture until they then get to like a mating ground. So they're looking for other turtles there as well. In that, you know, we're learning more about just, for instance, by using those cameras and trying to better understand that, you know, do they specifically want to spend time together or not? And what do they get from that?
Sophia and Michaela and a couple other people asked, do the tags hurt the turtles? We get that a lot. We've gotten it asked about the sharks being, anytime you're putting these, maybe just certain, probably, I think they asked it right when you were talking about the scoot, the tag in the scoot, sort of paddle tag.
Yeah. So the way I liken it to, so obviously it's an animal, it's got nerves and so on, so it's going to feel it. But if you think about maybe if you've pierced your ears or got the piercing, for instance, that initial piercing, you feel that, right? And then it just kind of, that pain fades away. So if you think about that, there's like a pressure that they would feel, and then it fades away. And they heal up very quickly. So we recapture turtles quite frequently, and you can see the healing process, and it's very fast, similar to sharks, I would say, actually, in terms of how quickly they can heal. But they don't really freak out at all. You know, like when you're handling the turtle, you would see if it was in a huge amount of pain. And like I said, they swim off very happily when they do that. So it's kind of like your nail material, really, more than skin, I guess.
Cool. Rebecca and Isabel, who are joining us from New Hampshire, wanted to wanted to know, how do turtles feel? I guess maybe the shell or the body, like what do they feel like?
Yeah, so I think people are really surprised when you feel their skin, so like around under their flippers and so on, it's really soft around their neck, very, very soft. But the shell is very hard, of course. So again, that's kind of like that really hard nail material. But the skin feels very soft in a kind of leathery way, but it's not slimy. And it can be really sharp as well, so you have to be careful. So like the edge of the shell could be really sharp. They do all have like a little claw on their front flipper that you have to be careful of as well. And stay away from their mouth, because they've got very tough jaws. So you don't ever want to get your finger stuck there.
And I think the research I did with turtles was based on, we were looking at tiger shark diet. So we were trying to understand and the impact. And I was just really surprised at how strong they are, even out of the water. I mean, these animals, people don't realize like how fast. We had a couple people ask, and they're very, very fast. Particularly a juvenile sea turtle, a green sea turtle, is super fast, especially when you're trying to catch them, as I'm sure you can attest to it. It's amazing how strong these animals are. And
very
cool. So Josh asked us, he knows that females return to the same beaches, but do we see any site fidelity, or, they're returning to the same beaches as you do, similar to behavior in the females?
Yeah, so it's not my area of expertise at all, because I don't get to work so much with adult turtles, but I think them is probably with the demographic of turtles I'm probably know least about, just because they don't leave the water, so they don't go up on nesting beaches where we've learned a lot about turtles from. I would imagine that you get turtles that will return. They basically are moving between feeding grounds and mating grounds, so they must maintain that very tight kind of migration between the two. So you'd expect those mating male turtles to keep going back to the same mating grounds, I imagine, rather than spreading out. But that might be wrong. I'm not sure. It's not my forte.
And I think, one of the things we've mentioned with a lot of these animals is the reason this science work and collecting this data is so important is because there are still large questions that we just don't know. We haven't answered, and the ocean is such a massive place, and resources, boats, money, people, everything. It takes a lot to be able to access these animals throughout their lifetime, and we may just have a glimpse of when they're born, or a glimpse of their mating, or when they're juveniles or adults. And so it's one of the biggest challenges about studying marine animals is really the ocean's a big place, and so having access to them, I think, which makes I want everyone to understand is we've talked about the research for sharks and turtles, is why it's so important. So yeah, that turtle might feel a little pinch, but if it allows us to understand migration patterns, where they're mating, where they're giving birth, these are critical questions we need to answer for conservation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if everyone always realizes that actually people haven't been doing this for very long. You know, turtles were probably the same as sharks. Like, people only started caring about conserving sharks and not fishing them only in the last, like, maybe 4 or 5 decades or so. So people haven't really been studying them for a huge amount of time, which is why, yeah, we do need to learn more about them. And also remember that the ones that we do study are still a fraction of the larger population. We're trying to learn as much as we can from those few turtles that we do study. So, you know, we showed you that data sheet. We get every little scrap of information that we can from that turtle that could help anybody in lots of different projects. And overall, like, you know, for instance, here in the Bahamas, you know, we've maybe tagged, me personally, like in my research group, maybe like 800 or 900 turtles, but there's probably, you know, thousands of turtles, tens of thousands, I would garner here in the Bahamas. And so remember that what we're doing to those turtles, where it's tagging and so on, is a very small proportion of the wider population. Same thing with sharks as well.
Cool. So we've got 2 more questions. A couple people, including Oriana, and I'm just trying to proceed down, and Ahmed, what got you interested? Why did you want to study sea turtles?
So I was already spending a lot of time, you know, working on different marine research projects between reef fish, sharks, and so on, and, you know, just spending time in these amazing coastal habitats. And I'd never come across a turtle until I met a turtle researcher, a turtle biologist, you know, Stevie Connett. And he asked me, he's like, well, what are you doing with all the turtles around here? We know you're studying them. I'm like, no, we don't see any turtles around here, Stevie. What are you talking about? And he took me out the next day and pointed them all out to me. And I was like, oh my gosh, they're right here on our doorstep. And they were incredible. And I caught my first one, and that was it. I was like, okay. And it's just been a case of then, you know, talking to people, asking questions, and learning from other people, and just kind of taking it from there and recognizing, like we've said already, wow, there's a lot we still could find out about these animals. And so that was that.
All right, and just a thank you. We actually had a couple of schools in St. Martin. I just wanted to say thank you. A couple of their schools, we had some students in Spain as well. So,
awesome.
So thank you. And our final question is, what can people do to help sea turtles?
Well, say that again.
What can people do? What can anyone watching do to actually help save sea turtles?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's so many different things. So we, you know, in terms of, well, sea turtles, first of all, are really great umbrella species, I guess, if you like. So like by helping turtles, you're helping lots of other marine organisms as well. And we don't necessarily always realize that things we do every day in life are connected back to the ocean. So one thing would be thinking about the food that you eat. So one of the biggest threats to sea turtles is that they're getting caught as bycatch in fisheries. So learn about, if you eat seafood, learn about how it's caught and make sure that it's being caught in a sustainable way. So for instance, things like shrimp, for the most part, they're caught in big trawl nets, and hundreds of thousands of turtles are caught in those every year. So that's a huge one. Think about your waste that you produce in your daily life, and how is it processed? Where does it end up? You know, is it ended up in the oceans or on the shoreline? Those are 2 really key things. And then also just in general, just thinking about just how we live our lives and what can we do to reduce our impact on the planet. I think that overall is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of a message. There's a lot of things. It doesn't really matter what animal it is. There's some common themes there. And you know, while we're at home right now thinking about those things, and how when we go back to normal, I guess, is how can we take action and be part of that, and use less plastic, and be more aware of the things we're buying and the choices we're making. And that really impacts all of us. It just makes the entire planet better for all of us. So, well, thank you so much to everyone who joined and all the questions. And thank you so much, Annabelle, for your time and sharing all that amazing information with everybody who watched. And don't forget, guys, this will actually be on YouTube shortly. So if you missed part, or you want to watch again or share with your friends and family, check that out. You can check out our Sharks for Kids website. We'll have the links. But thank you again for everyone that joined. And thank you so much, Annabelle, for your time.
Thanks for having me. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much. Take care.